Secondly, an expansion and upgrading of public sector employment, particularly in the areas of health and education. CNAs, people in elder care, people in child care, nurses, teachers, teachers' assistants, and those jobs will pick up a different sector of the labor force, more predominantly women and minority. So we need to, and there's certainly a need. It's not that we are overwhelmed with a surplus of people in those kinds of jobs. Lastly, of course, energy and a forward-looking industrial policy around energy, its sources, its uses, and its costs. Now, a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't have an industrial policy. Industrial policies don't work. Two responses. One, industrial policies do work. All you have to do is look at Scandinavia to know that industrial policies work. You should probably also look at China to know that industrial policies work. Two, we have in fact had an industrial policy. We have favored the finance industry over the last 20 to 30 years. It's given us an exciting ride. It's done some interesting things, but it keeps getting into trouble. This isn't the first time. You know, we're sort of struck by what happened in late 2008. But some of you may remember long-term capital management, when the Fed desperately pulled people together to solve something they thought was going to collapse. You may remember the various currency crises, the Asian tigers, etc. Finance gives you some interesting times, but probably not the times that we want to keep repeating. So we need industrial policy around the forward-looking technologies, particularly in the area of energy. What should these jobs look like? Well, we think in terms of pay, we should strike the jobs at the median salary level, which is about $18 an hour in 2006. That works out to about $37,440 a year, median salary level, with a training on-ramp, since we're hoping to draw people into the labor force that may not have much experience working, may need some more training. A training on-ramp pay of around $11.11 an hour. How did we come up with that? There's the studies of low wage and just above low wage salaries, and that's where we come with that number. The last aspect of these job focus, all of these jobs should allow the people working in them to make their choice about how they might want to associate together, for example, in unions under the Employee Free Choice Act. So this is the second point, that these jobs need to be targeted, they need to be long-term, and they need to be focused on these particular areas of the economy. This is not a make-work program, it's not a stopgap program. It's a program to transform the nature of the labor force in the U.S. Last point, how do we pay for this? How much does it cost? The first year, if we generate the 4 million net new jobs, the first year's cost will be about $135 billion. That includes about a 5% overhead. Social Security runs with a 2% overhead. We've been a little generous. But remember, we're doing this for 5 years, so each cohort builds up. So by the fifth year, we're spending $675 billion. Now, when we started thinking about this in August and September, we thought, oh, nobody's ever going to, can't possibly spend that much money. It's just off the charts. We have since learned that that's really not all that much money. After all, we really want to do something, get it done, it's there. It is about 0.5% of the gross domestic product. But jobs will put people back to work. They will pay taxes. They will have money to meet their mortgage payments. I'm not going to talk about foreclosures. I think, in fact, there is a separate economic program you need around foreclosures. This isn't going to solve it completely. This will help. But they will have money to meet rent payments, to buy groceries, and to keep themselves employed. And right now, we are in on the edge of being the kind of liquidity trap that Keynes recognized in the 1930s, the problem of demand. The economy is shutting down, and the Fed, in terms of lowering interest rates, is in a position of pushing on a string. You can push interest rates down, you can push money in the banks, but nothing comes out the other end. How do we finance this? Well, part of it, of course, if it's going to have any impact in terms of stimulus to get the economy going, part of it should be deficit finance, particularly at the beginning. But over the longer term, there are some fairly simple ways to finance it. You can put an income tax surcharge of 5% on the top 2% of the families by income. That's families making roughly over $250,000, and Obama's already talked about doing something in that area, and you'll generate about $200 billion a year. People, I think, often forget. Well, someone will say to me, why do you want to tax those people? And my response is the same response that Willie Sutton was given. He was a bank robber, and asked Willie Sutton, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. The money is. Okay? The top 2% of families account for about 25% of the total income. Secondly, let's let expire Bush's change in the estate tax, the Paris-Hilton tax. Let's Bush's exchange in the estate tax expire. Let it go back to progressively and index it. This impacts about 0.25% of the people who die each year. It would raise about another $100 billion. Thirdly, we could put a tax on all stock transactions. It's called a Tobin tax. A very modest tax of about 1/4 of the value. Now, at current trading levels, it's 1/4. At current trading levels, that would generate about $350 billion. I recognize that that might discourage some short-term day trading. So maybe the $350 billion is optimistic in terms of the amount of money, but nonetheless, it'll generate a lot of money. And if it discourages some short-term day trading and has people go out and get real jobs, I'm not sure that's the worst thing in the world.
Yes.
And lastly, because we realize that many people want to claim the military budget, we said, well, we'll just take $100 billion from the military budget, that's all. We will, by putting those things together, we will generate more than even the $675 billion necessary at the end of the year. There are other possible sources. You could decide you want to collect the roughly $350 billion in corporate taxes that's not collected now because of things like tax havens and other things. You know, so some other sources. This is financially doable. I think to the point where it's almost politically doable in terms of willpower, but it does take will. Okay, to summarize. This program is redistributed in its impact in terms of who gets the jobs, and in terms of its financing. It's secondly linked to longer-term health of the U.S. economy. It's not a stopgap, not a make-work program. And thirdly, and I think very importantly, going back to what one of the things that some of the other speakers like Quentin has said, it's transformational in terms of the role of government. We want to rekindle the concept that public good and public goods can be achieved by the collectivity of which we're all part of, the government of the United States of America. You can find at the URL on the bottom of the e-book sheet, you can find a complete paper there. I also, at that point on the paper, sorry I didn't, I thought 50 was sort of optimistic.
Maybe someone can announce what the URL is.
Yeah, okay. I'll give you the simplest one, because the other one, one is very, very long. The simplest one is chicagodsa.org/jobs.pdf. Also very long, much longer one, it's the same paper. The other thing, just for your interest, if you like to read about things like this, Jonathan Alter's The Defining Moment, FDR's First 100 Days, Barbara Kuttner's Obama's Challenge, America's Economic Crisis and the Power of a Transformative Presidency, and Paul Krugman, The Return of Depression Economics and Crisis of 2008, all are worth looking at. Thank you.